Hey everyone.
Hey everyone.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be talking about what is probably the most often question that we've gotten over the last year or so, and that is how far away you need to be from home to take a travel contract. We've made several videos in the past about tax home. We've touched on this kind of in those videos, but we've never made a video or written an article specifically about how far away you need to be. And we get so many questions about it that it'll be good to have a resource to send people to in the future that ask this question. So Whitney's going to introduce us. We got a couple announcements and then we'll talk about the topic.
All right. Hey, for those of you that may not know us, we are Whitney and Jared Kazaza. We're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We've been travel PTs for over 9 years now, so going on a decade. And we're from Virginia, and we've taken a lot of contracts on the East Coast, as well as we've worked in Alaska and Hawaii. We now no longer work full-time as travel PTs. We work part of the year and take a lot of time off during the year because we are now semi-retired. We have done videos and articles on just about every topic that you can think of in regards to travel therapy over the years. So some of you guys may have looked at some of our content in the past, but if you are new to our page, to our social media channels, welcome. Make sure you go back and listen to some of our older stuff too, because we probably have answered your question there before. We are live tonight on both Instagram and Facebook, so hello to everyone that is watching live. And then shout out to those of you that will also listen later on our podcast, on YouTube, or on one of the replays on Instagram or Facebook. So we appreciate you guys tuning in. If you guys would like, if you're watching live, please leave a comment and say hello. Let us know that you're watching. Let us know if you're a current traveler or someone who's thinking about traveling. Also, if you have any questions throughout the video, feel free to leave those in the comments and we'll answer them accordingly. So we will dive into, we got a couple announcements we wanted to make.
First thing is we're getting ready to do a Labor Day giveaway for our course. So that'll be on Instagram. Just giving course free access to one person for the course. When is that going to be?
So we're going to do that this weekend for Labor Day weekend. So for those of you that are not familiar with our course, we do have a comprehensive travel therapy course that explains everything that you need to know from start to finish on how to get started as a travel therapist and also how to be financially successful in this path. We've used travel therapy to, as I mentioned, semi-retire in our 30s and become financially independent. And so we decided to make a course that explains to you not only just the nuances of how to get started as a travel therapist, but how to do it in an intentional way where you focus on your finances and can get into a better financial position via travel therapy, which is what we've been able to do. So if you're interested in our course, you can check it out at traveltherapymentor.com/course to see all the details of what is offered there. But yeah, stay tuned this weekend because we're going to give away free access to one person during our Labor Day giveaway.
Other thing is we're still doing our contract completion giveaway. So at the end of the year, we're going to give away 5 $200 gift cards, Amazon gift cards to people that have taken contracts with one of our recruiters throughout the year that we've recommended. This is a way that we get feedback about the recruiters that we have to make sure that they're still a good fit for people in the future. We've got more than 50 recruiters that we send people to now. So getting feedback about the companies and the recruiters really helps us in the future. And to incentivize people to tell us about how their contract went and how their recruiter was and the company, we give away $1,000 at the end of the year. So if you're taking a contract with one of the recruiters that we sent you to, or like a job from our hot job list, there's a form on our website you can fill out to be entered in that giveaway.
Yep, so just go to traveltherapymentor.com and on the menu it says giveaway and click there and fill out that form. If you have completed a contract already this year, you're already eligible. All you need to do is just fill out that quick form so that we can get you entered to win. If you're somebody who's thinking about getting into travel therapy and you haven't taken a job with one of our recruiters, feel free to reach out to us if you want to get connected with one of our recommended recruiters.
Yep.
And then the last giveaway that we will be doing at the end of the year is for anyone that wants to leave us a review. You can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on our Facebook page, and then just send us a screenshot of that review. Just send it to us in Messenger or in our DMs or an email, and then we'll get you entered for that giveaway as well. So lots of giveaways coming up. I can't believe it's already coming up on the last quarter of the year.
It's crazy.
Time is fun. So thanks to those of you that are tuning in. Hi, Joanne. Hi, Allie. bunch of people on Instagram. Thanks for tuning in. Again, if you have any questions throughout, just feel free to post them in the comments.
All right, so some background on this question and why we get it so much. A lot of people right now are really interested in travel therapy, like people that would have never been interested before. Part of that is they see us talk about how good the market is right now, especially PT market is really good. There's a lot of high paying jobs, contracts all over the country. So people are thinking, oh, I'm not that happy with my job. Maybe I could take travel jobs. But a lot of these people don't really want to travel away from home. Maybe they have family that they need to be close to or other obligations where they need to be close to home. So they want to know, how far away from home do I really need to be a traveler? And so, a lot of companies have different ways of dealing with this type of thing because, you don't want to be in a situation where the company or the traveler takes tax-free stipends that they're not eligible for. And that's why we've kind of touched on this in the past about tax homes, because this applies a lot to your tax home and your situation there. But there's a lot of nuance here, and like everything you learn a lot about, nothing is black and white. There's a lot of gray area. So we want to cover it in depth so that people in the future will have a good resource for this.
Yeah, quite often we get people that are asking this question, how far away from home do I need to be for it to really be considered a travel job? Maybe they're tied down to their geographic location because of family. Maybe they're locked into a lease or a mortgage and they're really not able to travel away from home, but they want to take advantage of those benefits that come with travel. Maybe they want to try out some different settings, have a more flexible schedule. They want to be able to have like a shorter term contract where they could take off the summers or take off time to do things. They want to make more money. So they're trying to find a way for the best of both worlds. But unfortunately, it is a little bit more complicated than just how far away is it. And that's why we have to really dig into some of the important key terminology for you guys to understand and key components of what it means to be a travel therapist. Because unfortunately, it's not so easy for us to just say, you need to be this number of miles from home. There's more to it than that.
Now, before we get too much into this, of course, if you have any situation where you have any questions, don't ask us these questions. Ask an accountant. We know about our own situation. We've talked to our own accountant. We have a little bit of idea, but everybody's situation is different. So if you're in a situation where you don't know if you qualify for tax-free stipends, if you have a tax home, all that, there's tons of accountants that you can talk to. We have one that we can recommend to you. $50, maximum $75, and they can give you advice about your whole situation. So there's no reason not to do that. Don't just ask us or other travelers for advice on your situation, because you're at best getting like 50% of probably all the nuance that goes into it.
Yeah, we see this so often where people just it's almost like sometimes they're asking the question about the tax home, but they don't even really want the answer. They just want to be reassured from some other travel therapist that's like, yeah, you're fine, don't worry about it. Or some recruiter, they just want you to be like, yeah, don't worry about it. But honestly, at the end of the day, when it comes to all this tax home stuff and the tax-free stipends and all these things, these are IRS rules. This has nothing to do with the hospital, the clinic, the facility, the travel company, the recruiter, nothing to do with them. It has to do with how you're taxed by the government. And so when it really comes down to it, when you're dealing with tax home rules, the bottom line is, are you at risk of being audited? And if you get audited, are you meeting the rules? And really, that's going to be a you problem. It's not going to be if you get audited and then you are found to be not eligible for these tax-free stipends, but you've been taking the stipends. Now you're going to owe back taxes. And then you can't go to your recruiter and be like, but you said, or you can't go to that random travel therapist on the Facebook group, on the internet, on the Reddit, that said like, nah, you're good. They're not going to help you with the back taxes you owe. So really it's your responsibility to kind of look into this stuff. So as Jared mentioned, if you guys want to get in touch with the tax advisor that we've worked with, she does a tax home consult just via phone. She'll explain everything to you and go over your specific situation for $50. So I think that's really worth it for the peace of mind for understanding the tax home stuff. But anyway, we'll dig into some more details about how all this stuff works.
So the first thing, since this is kind of a nuanced and gray area, we need to talk about some terminology, because a lot of times people asking this question don't have the background information to even know what they're really asking. And the answer is, if someone just asks us this question with no context, the answer is you can be any distance away. It doesn't matter. It could be next door and you could still take it as a travel contract. The reason is because there's such thing as local contracts. There's such thing as being an itinerant worker, and then there's regular travel that most people are talking about. And depending on your situation, each of those might fit you well, and we can't really know which one you're asking about depending on what situation you're in.
So it's honestly not the question of can I take the job if it's close to home. It's can I take the job and receive tax-free stipends is the real question that people are asking.
Usually, yeah. So for tax-free stipends, there's some rules that the IRS has set that says whether or not you qualify for tax-free stipends. And another gray area, like with anything IRS related or government related, these guidelines are not very specific. But we do have some idea of what they mean by what the guidelines say based on court cases in the past where these things have been challenged and rulings that were made that give us more insight into what they mean. So basically, to have a tax home, there's 3 criteria. And what the IRS says is that you need to meet at least 2 of the 3, but ideally 3 of the 3.
Well, and before we dig too much into that, so in regards to the tax-free stipends, it's important to understand what that is and why we're given it as travel therapists. So it's not just a travel therapist thing. It's not just a travel nurse or travel healthcare thing. It's a loophole that kind of exists for any type of worker in the United States that travels away from home for work. So the IRS sets certain guidelines, and they're like, oh, well, there are some types of workers, not just traveling healthcare, pilots, linemen, lots of different jobs where you're required to leave home for a certain amount of period to go and take a job. And so the IRS has created this loophole where they're like, oh, if you have to incur expenses as a result of your job while you're traveling away from your main residence, we're going to give you a tax break on some of that money, on some of those expenses. So for example, different types of workers like pilots and that sort of thing, they can qualify to receive as part of their compensation for their job tax-free stipends or a per diem. And so for a pilot, that might look like more short-term. Maybe they're only staying 1 or 2 nights away from home for their job. And so the expenses that they incur as a result of traveling away from home, they don't have to pay taxes on that. So they get a per diem for their lodging, housing, so their lodging, their meals, and incidentals during those couple of days that they're away from home. Now, with travel healthcare workers, we're away from home a lot longer. It's usually 3 months or 6 months. So it's a little more like of a gray area there. And that's why it can just be a little bit more confusing and people bend the rules more when it comes to your eligibility to receive these tax-free stipends. But that's a little background on like why tax-free stipends exist. And that'll go into play when we talk about like, if you live at your house and commute to a job, you're not meeting the specifications to qualify for these tax-free stipends. There's no reason for the government to give you that tax break.
Yeah, and that tax break, like Whitney said, it exists across the board. So what she's talking about a lot there are W-2 jobs. It also applies for business owners. For example, for us, for our business, when we go to CSM or the OT conference, we write off those expenses, our hotel, our meals, our incidentals, because we have a home, we're traveling away for work, and we'll be gone for 5 or 6 days. We write those expenses off. So for travelers, it's the same type of situation, it's just longer term. Instead of it being a 5-day conference, it's a 3-month work assignment away from home.
Yeah. And so why this has to do, the tax-free stipends and the tax home are very closely tied, because in most circumstances for these types of workers that only go for very short time frames away from home, they have a pretty clear-cut tax home. They have a place of residence where they primarily sleep most nights of the year. They primarily conduct all their business and their work and their social ties and their business ties, their cars registered, all these things. But it has become more unclear for workers like travel healthcare workers that are kind of essentially nomadic, almost move around year round. And so there are some travelers that really don't even maintain like an actual permanent residence, and they're not going back there the way they're supposed to in order to be eligible for these stipends. So that's where it just gets a little bit more tricky, and we need to make sure we're meeting certain guidelines.
Okay, so the 3 guidelines, like I mentioned, you want to meet at least 2 of the 3, if not 3 of the 3. Those are maintain business in the area, regularly return there or don't abandon your tax home area, and have housing or other expenses in the area. So financial obligations. Now, again, those are kind of vague, right? Most travelers meet 2 of the 3, those being not abandoning the area, which based on court cases we know that means either 30 days per year back at your tax home or 60 days every 2 years back at your tax home. So normally travelers meet that requirement, and then the other one they meet is have housing or other expenses there, and that just basically means duplicating expenses. So you have rent or mortgage or something that you pay back home, and then you obviously have rent or mortgage payment that you have, or not mortgage payment, but rent that you'd have on your travel contract at the location where you're staying.
And then the one about maintaining business in the area, again, it's a little bit vague because a lot of people don't have a permanent job or a PRN job or any type of work in their tax home because they basically just do their work away as travel therapists. So, the IRS in these situations would look at business like, are you registered to vote there? Is your car registered there? Is your insurance there?
Is your license have that address on it?
Yeah, so we want to maintain business ties to that area. And now when it comes to the expenses, another question that we quite often get here is, well, what if I just pay a bill at the house where I consider my tax home? Here you're trying to blur the lines, right? You're like, well, I want to still kind of maintain this tax home, but it's at my parents' house, and they're not going to make me pay the mortgage, so I'll just pay the phone bill, right? No, I mean, per the IRS rules, you really need to be maintaining actual expenses there, like you pay actual rent or have an actual mortgage payment there to really solidify that that's your actual home. Because if you had an actual home, you would be responsible for a lot more than just the phone bill, right? So it needs
to be a fair market amount for sure.
Yeah.
But we've talked about that a ton in other videos.
Right. So again, we're just kind of giving you some background here on some of this terminology. So the next two things we need to consider here in terms of the terminology when we get into this question are, what's an itinerant worker?
And I saw Allie said that her situation, she's an itinerant worker.
Yep. And so this will speak to Allie's situation a little bit. So an itinerant worker is someone who actually is more just nomadic and just kind of moves around and does not maintain the tax home. And that's fine. You can do that. And quite frankly, probably a lot of travel therapists should be itinerant workers. They basically are, because we meet people all the time that'll be like, yeah, I don't do any of that tax home stuff. I just risk it. And if I got audited, I got audited, and we'll see, but I don't think I'm going to get audited. So an itinerant worker is someone who's not maintaining a real permanent residence. They're not meeting all the tax home rules. They are really just kind of bouncing around the country and taking jobs. Allie considers herself an itinerant worker because she's not from the United States originally, so she doesn't have a permanent residence in the United States, so she moves around and takes travel contracts. But the difference here is if you're not going to maintain the tax home, then you can't accept the tax-free stipends. That's the big difference. Basically, you're allowed to still take travel contracts. You're just going to have all your pay taxed.
Yep. So yeah, like Whitney said, there's a lot of people that are pushing the boundaries with tax homes, and they take tax-free stipends, hope they never get audited. And we definitely do not recommend that because, at least for us, it's hard to sleep at night knowing that you could be in a situation where you have to pay taxes on stipends that you got, pay penalties, interest. That sounds crazy. So instead, we would much prefer us and anyone we talk to figure out a tax home situation that will work for you, or just take jobs as an itinerant worker and not worry about the whole tax home situation.
Yeah. So that's what it would mean to be an itinerant worker. You take travel contracts, but you're not maintaining a tax home. So therefore, all your travel contracts, your pay package is just all taxed. You don't accept the tax-free stipends. Similarly, another terminology here would be local travel. And so this is quite often what people are kind of referring to when they ask us, how far away from home do I have to be? Could I just take local travel contracts? And this would mean that you live at your house and you just commute to different travel jobs. So they might be 10 minutes away, they might be 30 minutes away, they might be 45 minutes away, but you stay at your house and you drive to the contract. And then when that contract's up, you try to find another contract in the area, and you also still commute daily back and forth to that job. That's fine. You're allowed to do that. It's just that, again, you can't accept the tax-free stipends if you're commuting from your house because you're not meeting those tax home rules. You're not duplicating expenses and living away from home. And again, if we think about the whole concept as a big picture, why would the IRS pay you tax-free stipends if you just live at your house and commute to the job? That's just a regular job. To them, it's not a travel job. Even if it's 50 miles, even if it's 60 miles, even if you're commuting a far commute, you're just like any other worker who kind of has a far commute.
Yeah, and to think about it in other terms, like I talked about, for business owners, you get to write off expenses for business travel. Well, this would be like a situation where you're going to a conference, but it's in your hometown. So you're staying at home and just driving to the conference every day. Well, there's no housing expenses to write off or to get a stipend for because you're just driving from home. So it'd be the same thing in that situation as taking a local travel contract. You can take it, you'll get paid a flat hourly fee, usually higher than a permanent job, almost always higher than a permanent job, closer usually to PRN rates, but you don't get the tax-free stipend. So just the difference there.
So hopefully by covering some of that terminology, that'll clear up some of the nuances to the situation. But we are going to go into more detail. We're going to explain some specific examples to make it more clear for you guys and help answer the question, how far away from home do you need to be? If you are watching live and you are learning anything from this video, we would appreciate if you would just hit the thumbs up button or the heart on Instagram or Facebook. Also, if you have questions, feel free to just leave a comment and ask the question, and we'll answer it toward the end.
So we have a whole video, I know we've made at least one on local travel, but just to recap real quick, because people that are asking the situation are often in the situation where they're looking at local travel contracts, they just don't know what that's called. So for a local travel contract, again, there's no distance required. It could be next door to you because you're just commuting there anyway. Pay would all be taxed, usually somewhere probably, I would say $45 to $60 an hour range. You just get a flat rate just like you would at a permanent job. It's similar to a PRN rate, and there's no guarantee there'll be jobs in your area. So that's always something to think about when people think, okay, I want to travel, I want to get all the benefits of travel, but I don't want to leave home. Well, the first question is, are there even jobs in your area? And depending on where you live, there may or may not be. If you live in the Bay Area, you're going to have a ton of local contracts that you could take. If you live in rural Virginia, probably not that many options. So it really depends.
Yeah, so when people email us or send us a message and ask this question, we always tell them, okay, there's a couple of things to consider here. First of all, you want to do local travel, but is it realistic? And so then I usually ask, where do you live? And then most of the time we can get you connected with a recruiter so that you can talk to them about it, because they look at the job boards all the time and they're like, oh yeah, if you live in this area, we tend to see a lot of jobs in that area for your discipline. So you could probably make it work if you wanted to do some local contracts just around your region. That's fine. But if it also depends on your discipline and the setting that you're interested in. So the more particular you are, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to find local contracts in your area. If you live in a small place and say you're like a CODA or some discipline that doesn't have quite as many jobs, and if you are really specific, like I only want outpatient pediatrics, well, it's just not going to work. But if you're, for example, physical therapists right now, there's tons of need for physical therapists. And if you're like, I'm open to outpatient or skilled nursing and I live near a big city, well, then you're going to have a lot more job options. So we just need to look at how realistic is it going to be for you to find local contracts. Now, the other thing too to consider here is like, which type of recruiter are you working with? Because when people reach out to us, I look at all those things and direct you toward the recruiter that would be the best fit for you. There are some recruiting companies that will do what's called cold calling, where they'll actually call and market directly to facilities for you and try to find you a contract in the exact location that you're looking for. And when you're looking for local contracts, that's probably your best bet. Whereas some recruiters that you'll talk to, they might just say, I looked at my job list and I don't see anything. Sorry, can't help you. And that's kind of just the way that they function. They're like, if it's on my list and it's open, I'll submit you to it. If it's not on my list, I can't do anything for you. So that's also something to take into consideration. If you are being more particular on the area and you need only local jobs, you need a particular type of recruiter for that.
Yep. So that's local contracts. There are people though that will ask this question and they don't want to take it as a local contract. They want to be close to home. They're still planning to move. They just want to know how far away they need to be for it to be a travel contract to get tax-free stipends. So if you want tax-free stipends, you need to be beyond a reasonable commutable distance from your house. And of course, this depends on the area. There are cities where people sometimes commute long distances. There's rural areas where sometimes people drive an hour and a half to work. Like, it really depends on your metro area. There's some cities where it takes forever to drive 20 miles. So maybe that's outside of a reasonable commutable distance, just depending. So there's no set distance. And some travel companies will use what they call the 50-mile rule to kind of weed people out that are trying to game the system, so to speak. And they say, okay, you know what, if it's less than 50 miles from your home, we won't give you tax-free stipends for that at all, because chances are you could commute to that location. And that is not an IRS thing. That is just a way that travel companies kind of cover themselves, because if they, realistically, if they signed you up for a travel contract 20 minutes from home and you say, oh yeah, I'm not going to commute, I'm going to get an apartment closer, and you did commute, that could put you and them in a situation where if you got audited, they might be in trouble, you might be in trouble. So some companies use this 50-mile rule. That's not an IRS thing. That's just kind of their own internal way of weeding people out that are probably going to commute and are just trying to get tax-free stipends that they're not eligible for.
Yeah. So keep in mind, there's really no set distance. You just need to think about your area. What is considered a reasonable commute? Just think about people that you know that travel for work, commute kind of a long way for work. What's normal in your area? Is it normal that someone would have a regular job that they have to kind of commute an hour? Well, then you probably need to be outside of that radius. For just think about that for your situation and where you live. But again, sometimes the travel companies will hold you to 50 miles, even though it's not a real rule. It's just kind of a rule of thumb, but sometimes they will hold you to that. But it also doesn't mean that just because it's 51 miles that you're in the clear. You still can't live at home and commute. It needs to be beyond a reasonable commute, and you also need to not just be unreasonable, you know what I mean? So like it can't just only be beyond a reasonable commute, but you're like, but I'm gonna drive it anyway. You also have to duplicate expenses. So you need to move there to the other location, be maintaining your tax home expenses, and be renting at the other location in order to meet all the rules to get the tax-free stipends.
So in most cases, if it's more than 50 miles away and you actually are getting an apartment or renting a room or something closer to the assignment, you're actually staying 4 or 5 nights a week at that place at least, then you should be in good shape. But again, every situation is different. Every metro area is different. If you're ever in question or you're ever in doubt, say it's 60 miles away or 40 miles away or 70 miles away or whatever the situation, always good to talk to a CPA and just get their advice on it too.
Yep. So just to recap, how far away does it have to be? If you're planning on taking it as a local contract and commuting, it doesn't have to be any set distance away. Just realize that if you're commuting, you can't take it with untaxed stipends. Your pay package is just going to look like an all-taxed rate, which might be kind of more similar to like a PRN rate. It might be like, okay, your whole pay package is going to be $50 an hour, all taxed. But if it is beyond a reasonable commutable distance, you are going to move to that area and you are going to duplicate expenses, then you can take the tax-free stipends and get your pay package structured like a regular traveler.
Now, a good example of that is our situation. So when we first started traveling, we wanted to try out travel. We wanted to see how it'd be moving around, but we did not want to be too far from home in case we didn't like it. It's hard to believe this now, but 9-10 years ago, we were very uncertain about doing a bunch of travel. I'd never really left close to home very much, so we weren't really sure how it was going to go. So we wanted to stay relatively close. And so we were in the situation where we do want to take this as a travel job, but it can't be too close, obviously. So what we did is we took contracts that were about, I think mine was about 60, 65 miles away from home, and rented a room there. We did all that, but we were still close enough that on the weekends we could come home if we needed to, and if we hated travel, then we're not that far away. It wasn't a big cross-country move for our first contract to find out we didn't like it. And I think that's a good thing for a lot of people to do. A lot of travelers that aren't sure, like they, say you're a new grad, you want to travel, but you don't know how good of a fit it'll be for you. I think it makes a lot of sense to do it that way. Find a contract 80, 90, 100 miles from home where you're still close enough that you kind of have a support system, but you're far enough that it's a travel contract. You can see how you like it and go from there. If you like it, then great. Now you go across the country. If you don't like it, you move back home and take a job there. So we were in exactly that situation. We made sure we followed all the rules. 60 miles away, duplicating expenses, everything was good to go.
Yeah, in our case, the place that we took the job, it was definitely beyond what a reasonable person would commute. No one that lives in our town would commute to that town to take a job. That you just wouldn't. It was 65, 70 miles away. It was a pretty good distance away. We moved, paid our expenses back at home, maintained all the tax time rules, rented a place there. So we did everything correctly, received the tax-free stipends. So for some of you that are thinking about being kind of local, but you're willing to, go the extra mile to make sure you're duplicating expenses, doing all those things, it still could work for your situation, where you're just away from home for part of the week or, the whole week, but you come home on the weekends. But for some of you, that may not work. Maybe you are truly like, no, I need it to be locally. I need to be home every night because I have family, I have kids, whatever it is. So the second example would be a truly local contract where it's going to be a drivable distance. You're going to drive from home every day and back home that night. That's fine if you can find a contract that works well for you. Just again, your pay package is going to be different if you commute from your house. So how much different? We'll talk about that here in just a minute. And now the third example would be if you were an itinerant worker who is not going to maintain the tax home. You're still going to move around the country and go to California and go to Georgia and go to Montana and go all over the place like a regular traveler does to all these different places. You're just not meeting any of the tax home rules. You're not maintaining a permanent residence. You're not paying expenses there, all those things. So you're like, I get it. I'm not maintaining the tax home rules. So when my recruiter pitches the job to me in Montana and California and Florida and all these places, I say, that's great. I would like to take that job. However, I'm an itinerant worker, so I need you to tax all of my pay. I can't take the tax-free stipends because I'm not eligible.
Yep. And there's pros and cons to all these, of course. Local contracts, if you're in a situation where you just want short-term employment, maybe you're looking for a job, but you don't really want to commit to something, then if there's a travel contract open 10 miles away, then maybe that's a great way to spend a few months while you're job searching. Take a contract that you're going to make a little bit more money. You're still at home. You can still look for whatever permanent job you want to take. So that can work out perfectly. Obviously, a downside of that is there's no guarantee that you're going to find work when you need it, or when your contract is up, if there's going to be another contract around there if you don't find a permanent job or something like that. In terms of itinerant workers, the downside there, obviously you're not getting tax-free stipends, so your pay is going to be lower. But on the pro side, you don't have to deal with tax homes. You don't have to deal with trying to go back home and spend 30 days a year or 60 days every 2 years in that area, which, depending on your situation, might work out really well for you.
Yeah, so there's just different pros and cons if you're finding yourself in a situation where you have choices and you're trying to make a decision. Another reason you might be an itinerant worker, we find people all the time that are like, I'm toward the end of my career and we want to sell our house and buy an RV or whatever it is and just like truly be nomadic. And they're like, we don't want to have to pay our mortgage back home and all this stuff. We just want to put our stuff in a storage unit and just go. And so maybe it makes sense for you financially to just take the little bit of a pay cut by taking the contract all taxed without having to deal with the tax home situation. Similarly, if you're like a new grad who's like, I don't really have a tax home because like my parents live here, but it's not where I grew up. I grew up here, but then while I was in college, they moved, and then I rented a room or I rented an apartment when I was at college, and so now like I don't really have a tax home, and my parents don't really want to like rent a room to me. So you know, if you're in that situation, maybe you're just like, I don't want to deal with any of the tax home stuff. I'm just going to be nomadic and move around, and my parents will let me stay with them sometimes when I feel like coming back, or I have a storage unit or whatever it is. So there's a lot of reasons why you might be not wanting to deal with the tax home situation, and you might just be like, it's easier just to take these travel contracts all taxed. But, and then the last thing too would be like with the local contracts, people are like, am I still going to make more money by doing local contracts versus like, why wouldn't I just get a perm job? So let's talk about the financial aspect and like how much less you might make because you're getting all taxed.
And this obviously applies both to people taking local travel contracts and people that are working as itinerant workers, because in both situations you'll be taking all of your pay taxed. In most cases right now, travel jobs, the majority of travel jobs are paying somewhere between $1,900 and like $2,300 a week. That's probably the average range. Some higher, some lower, depending on where you're going, what setting, what location you're working in. You can see jobs right now, $3,000, but those are not very common jobs. If you took it all taxed, so a local contract that, say a really high paying local contract near you, or you decided you don't want to deal with tax homes at all and you're going to just take contracts around the country as an itinerant worker, most cases you'll make about $300 to $400 less per week. Most of that is because you're paying taxes, obviously, on the stipends that you would have gotten tax-free otherwise. But in addition to that, the travel company will pay you less than they would pay a regular traveler. The reason is they pay taxes on your hourly rate as well. So if you're a normal traveler, say you're getting a taxable rate of $25 an hour, and they're giving you $1,000 a week in stipends, versus someone that's taking contracts as an itinerant worker. Now, say your taxable pay is $55 an hour and you don't get any tax-free stipends. Well, you pay taxes on that $55 an hour, which is much higher than the $25 an hour you would have been paying taxes on. But the travel company also pays taxes on your behalf. Half of your FICA taxes, the travel company has to pay more there. So they can't pay you as high a taxable rate as they would if you were getting part of the pay tax-free, if that makes sense. So in most cases, after taxes, you're going to be making $300 to $400 a week less. In some cases, it might be a little bit more than that or a little bit less than that, depending on how high the job pays.
Yep. And so a way that you could figure this out if you're trying to figure out if it's worth it for you financially would be just to talk to some recruiters. Like if you're in a situation where you're like thinking about doing this, but you're not sure, just get on the phone with some of the recruiters and say, okay, for example, I want to do local travel and I see that you have this contract here 25 miles from home for me. I could do it as a local travel job. Can you tell me what's the pay package going to be if I take it as a local traveler, all tax? And then they'll just tell you like, oh, I'll run the pay package for you. This is how much you would make. And then you just have to take into consideration, is that worth it for you financially? Similarly, if you want to be an itinerant worker or you take jobs further away, just have them run the pay package for you. Or once you get a little more savvy with understanding how to run the pay packages yourself, you can just look at the pay package the way it's broken down and just be like, okay, I'm going to be taxed on all this instead of getting some of this tax free. If you want to learn how to do that, you can look at our pay articles to understand like how the pay packages are broken down, and just look at that amount of money and say, is it worth it for me? But the other thing to take into consideration here is it worth it for you? Is what are your expenses going to be? You are going to have less expenses than a traveler who's doing it the traditional way and maintaining a tax home. So that can offset the pay cut a little bit in that situation. But again, it's all very personal. It really depends. Like when people ask us, is it worth it? Well, it depends. What's the alternative? How much can you make permanent? How much are you making permanent right now? What are the permanent or the PRN jobs in your area paying? What's your discipline? Which setting? Like, we can't answer all those questions for you. You have to kind of look at your own current situation versus what would the situation be with an all-taxed contract versus what would the situation be if you could make it to where you weren't all taxed and you were eligible for the tax-free stipends.
Yeah, there's a nuance with everything. It's always depending on what you're comparing to. There was a student today on Instagram that messaged us and they were trying to decide if they should go to PT school at all, and we're asking questions about pay, and they were like, well, what can I expect to make? And I was like, I mean, if you're working a pediatric outpatient job on the East Coast, it might be $60,000 a year. If you're working home health in Nevada, it might be $130,000 a year. There's just a massive range. So when someone asks if travel's worth it, it's like, okay, are you taking outpatient jobs on the East Coast where you're making $68,000 a year, or are you working home health in California where you're making $120,000 a year? Because that's going to be a massive difference about whether or not travel is worth it, or local travel contracts make sense. Obviously the person making a lot of money might look at some of the pay packages for travel jobs and be like, that's not much more than I'm making now. Whereas someone that's not making that much will look at it and be like, that's 2.5 times what I make now. Of course it's worth it. So there's a lot to consider with travel. And this question in general, just to summarize everything again, how far away do you need to be from home? If it's a local contract, there's no requirement for how far you need to be. You just don't get tax-free stipends. You still make a little bit more money than a perm job, but not as much as a regular travel contract. If you do want to take it as a regular traveler, then you need to be outside of a commutable distance, and you need to be duplicating expenses, meaning you rent a place that's closer to your travel contract and you keep expenses back home. Yep. So that's the summarized version.
Yep. So hopefully that made sense. I know that if you're newer to travel therapy, a lot of these concepts can be confusing. Jared did just write an article on this topic that you guys can go and read on our website that kind of breaks it down more visually if you're more of a visual learner and you want to read that article. We also linked to additional resources within that article. I linked to the IRS guidelines if you want to read them yourself. We linked to our tax home articles so that you can better understand the tax home rules and those types of things. So there definitely is some research that goes into this planning process of being a travel therapist if you're starting to think about it. So hopefully this was helpful in understanding some of that, but definitely dig into some of the other resources that we have on our website to further understand it. And again, if you do want to get connected with some travel therapy recruiters, sometimes it just helps to just look at a real job board, like talk to a recruiter and say, like, realistically, what do you see available in my area? Can you show me what a realistic pay package would look like in my area versus a regular travel contract? And that might help with your decision making too. So reach out to us if you want help getting connected with good recruiters.
Yeah, and if you are in the situation where you're looking for jobs as an itinerant worker or local contracts, there are some companies that just don't even want to deal with that because they're not going to make as much money. There's recruiters, I've definitely heard situations where travelers will ask a recruiter and the recruiter will just never contact them back because they don't want to deal with it. So just make sure if you're in that situation that you get connected with good recruiters that are going to actually try to find you something.
Yeah, I will say that too. Like, we've had some people that come to us and they're like, I was talking to a couple of recruiters, but they just didn't even seem that interested in helping me. And you kind of have to think about it from the recruiter's perspective. If they have someone who is a lot more open on what they're looking for, and they're like, yeah, I'm a physical therapist and I'm open to these 3 states and these 3 settings, well, then they're like, oh, this person is going to be easy to find a contract for. Like, I've got all these options I can send them. Whereas it's going to require a lot more work on their end to find you a specific local contract in the exact city you need, in the exact setting you need. So while it is possible, it is harder to make it work. So just keep that in mind too. If anyone has any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I don't know if we got any.
I don't think so
yet. Allie again was explaining her situation as an itinerant worker. Let us know if you guys have any questions or comments about anything. If you want to share your own situation about what you've done in the past. Let's see. Okay, we got a question on Instagram. From my understanding, you have to be 50 miles from your tax home, but how long can you stay in one location? So it sounds like maybe you just joined. Actually, yes, it does say that you just joined. So I would recommend when we're wrapping up the video now, I would go back and listen to the whole video or listen to it when I upload it to the podcast later. The part where you said, I understand you have to be 50 miles from your tax home, that is not accurate. We explained in full detail why that's kind of a rule of thumb, but not a hard set rule. So there's a lot more to it than that. But to answer your second question, how long can you stay in one location? That is also a very typical question that we get.
So you can stay in an area, say you're taking it as a normal traveler with tax-free stipend, say it's 90 miles away, it's outside of a commutable distance, you're renting a room, you're duplicating expenses, then you'd be able to stay there for 12 months in any 24-month period. So you don't want to stay in any place more than 12 months because at that point, from the IRS's perspective, if you're working an entire year, more than a year in a certain area, then that area becomes your new tax home. And in that case, basically you're taking it as a local contract because you moved to that area, and any contract that you continue taking there would be fully taxed. And then if you go back to traveling, then that area that you're at now is your new tax home, and you need to duplicate expenses again from this new area. So yeah, don't stay in one place for more than a year in any 2-year period. Yeah,
and as a follow-up to this question, because we get this question a lot too, how long can I stay in one area? A lot of times the next question will be, how long do I need to leave before I can come back again? Because some people are like, I'm really enjoying this area. The facility wants me to stay. My recruiter said I could just leave for 30 days and then come back. Unfortunately, that is not the case because as Jared mentioned, the guidelines that we've heard from all the different CPAs that we've ever talked to is that you really don't want to spend more than 12 months out of a 24-month period. So if you stay there for 12 months, you need to leave for at least a full 12 months before returning there. There's also a further nuance here when it comes to school contracts, because school contracts are typically 9 to 10 months. And so you'd be gone for 3 months, and then if you came back for the next school year, again, you're already breaking the 12 within 24 months if you stay over 12. But also you don't want to go back-to-back school years because, again, what makes you different than just a regular school employee at that point? Because you're basically just taking time off in the summer just like a regular school employee, so you kind of are showing intent that you live there and that you regularly return to that area. So the IRS would in that situation consider that your new tax home. So you don't want to go back 2 school years in a row either. Yeah, follow up there was, what is considered an area, state or city? So when we say, do you want to stay in the same area for more than 12 months in a 24-month period, that is defined as the metro area, which means that anywhere that's in a commutable distance from your current travel assignment location. So say you're working in Kansas City, Kansas, and you want to take a job in Kansas City, Missouri. If it's still a commutable distance, then that would still count as the same metro area. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't want to be 30 minutes away and try to be like, oh no, this is a new area just because it's a new city. So it depends on how far the commutable distance is for that area. Yeah, and so similarly, it can't just be a new facility. So you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to change clinics, but I'm still going to be in Los Angeles. No, you need to leave Los Angeles altogether. Now, you don't have to leave California altogether. You could go 2 hours away or however many hours away San Diego is, and now you're in a new city, a new location. That's fine. So it doesn't mean you have to leave the whole state, but you do have to leave that commutable area, that metro area. And along those lines, there's travelers that spend their entire
years and years traveling in California in the same state, but they're moving Southern California, Central California, Northern California, just moving around California. That's fine as long as you're returning home, maintaining that tax home 30 days per year, 60 days every 2 years. As long as you're doing that, then that's fine. But you wouldn't want to stay like in San Diego for 18 months or something like that.
Yeah, and we've done a similar thing. Like we've worked a ton of our jobs all over our home state. We've worked in, Southwest Virginia, we've worked in Eastern Virginia, Northern Virginia, and Central Virginia, but all those places were 2, 3, 4 hours apart. So we were hopping around to different parts of the state and changing it up all the time. So we were not just in the same part of Virginia.
Yep.
John wants to know, how long can you return back to your home state if you've been working there for almost a year? That question's a little bit confusing, John. I hope we answered it already with explaining how long you need to, if you've been somewhere almost a year, you need to leave that area.
Yeah, it's not about coming back to your home state. It's about leaving the metro area. So even if you, like Whitney said, if your recruiter tells you, oh, you just go home for 30 days and you come back, that's not true. If you are in an area for a year, you go back home for 30 days, you still can't go back to that area for another 11 months. So it doesn't matter how long you spend at home, it's just about leaving that area, not earning all your income in the same area, because then you're not a traveler anymore. You're just someone that has moved to an area, worked there, and you visit home sometimes. It's different.
Because when you're asking all these questions, again, I know some of you guys just joined the video and so you didn't hear everything before, but we will post the replay so you can go back and listen to the whole thing again, either on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or our podcast. But go back and listen to the whole thing. What it all boils down to is, what is the IRS going to say? So if you work in a place for a whole year, then you're going to want to leave that area, because now you're at risk of the IRS considering that your new tax home, because the IRS considers your tax home the place where you earn the majority of your income. They don't care where you consider home. You're like, well, I'm a Virginian at heart, but they're like, well, but you haven't earned any income in Virginia and you haven't been back there in 2 years. So like, is Virginia really your home? The IRS doesn't care about all that. Or you're like, well, I get my mail at my house there. No, it's about where you've earned income.
And along the same lines, just to add a little bit even more nuance here, there's some people that are like, okay, well, I'll take a lot of contracts in this area, but I won't ever stay 2 years or more than a year in every 2 year period. I'll be gone. But there are situations where even that is not perfect, because if you earn the majority of your income in the same area 3 years in a row, to the IRS, it looks like that's where you earn the majority of your income, is that city. So for example, there's some people that will say they have a boyfriend or something they met in Los Angeles, but they live in Kansas. Well, they might be like, okay, well, I'll take 2 contracts a year in Los Angeles, and then I'll take 2 contracts a year somewhere else. Well, if you're taking 6 months of the year in Los Angeles, 3 years in a row, well, now you're earning the majority of your income in Los Angeles for those 3 years. So from the IRS perspective, that's the area that you earn the majority of your income, that's your tax home. So things are very nuanced. Again, if you have any questions about this stuff, definitely talk to a CPA, because we know probably the very surface level of these things.
Yeah, this is all based on us, we're not tax experts by any means. This is based on us reading what we could from the IRS website, talking to multiple CPAs who have experience with this, looking at some of the court cases where they have set precedents over it. Again, it all just boils down to trying to do the best you can based on the information that's available. And then it really comes down to, if you ever got audited, how would they interpret it and how could you back it up?
Yep.
So hopefully this was helpful if you are considering doing some local travel, or just trying to better understand how all of this works with the tax homes and those sorts of things. But again, if you have more questions, visit our website at traveltherapymentor.com, and we have a lot of resources on there about tax home, about local travel, and all that. And also, if you want to get connected with the travel CPA that we work with, we can give you her information so that you can set up a phone call and go over your specific situation.
All right, one more question, and then we'll get off here. Peggy on Facebook says, so do you need to take a job in the area of your tax home at least once a year, or do you need to just move around to different areas frequently?
That's a good question.
Very good question.
Yeah.
You don't need to work in your contract, or you don't need to take a contract in your home area every year for sure. You do need to be moving around often though. So you don't want to just have some area that's your primary area that you earn income that's not your tax home, because then that looks like your tax home multiple years in a row. So that's not an issue for someone that is, say, working in Alaska and then California and New York, and you're moving all around, there's no issue there because you're not earning the majority of your income in one set place. You're moving all over the country. So as long as you're duplicating expenses, you're going back to your tax home 30 days a year, no issue there at all.
Yep. So hopefully, again, this was helpful. If you guys have more questions, please reach out to us to get connected with a CPA. And we can also direct you towards just more resources to read more about this and try to understand it a little bit better. But hopefully that answers your questions. And again, if you guys have more questions, send us a message. If you want to get connected with some of the recruiters that we recommend, you can fill out our recruiter recommendation form on our website. And again, we will pick recruiters specific to your situation. I would not send someone who's looking for local travel only in a certain area to the same recruiters as someone who's looking for jobs all over the U.S. I look at each person's situation very individually, and I recommend recruiters based on that. So that's at our website at traveltherapymentor.com/recruiters if you're interested for that.
All right.
So keep an eye out for our giveaway that we're going to be doing this weekend on our social media pages. So I'll post that on Instagram and Facebook. And yeah, hope you guys have a great night.
Yep, take care.
All right, bye.
Bye.